On the last episode of the Keepsake box. He walked in like it was any other day, only it wasn't. It wasn't like any day I'd experienced prior to or since. David gave me a peck on the cheek and went into the living room. I smelled an odor on him that I couldn't exactly place at the time. Present day, I know exactly what it was. David placed his briefcase on the table and cheerfully requested that I join him. "Let's talk," he said. He told me that his only request was that I completely hear him out without interruption. I agreed and sat beside him, completely oblivious that my world was about to be turned upside down. David, very calmly, delivered my worst nightmare. He said, "Shelley, I want you to understand that very few things happen without my knowledge. However, I find it humorous that you believe the contrary. I'm sure you don't know this, but there are cameras in every room of this house." "That's right, Shelley. I know everything. Everything. I know that you and Juanita have been having an affair. I'm fully aware that this has been going on for a long time. I watched the first time that you were intimate with her without me. It occurred in the pool house. It was a Thursday and I was working late. I've allowed you to live in this fantasy world with Juanita because I have long tired of the both of you. I also know that you found my drug box. I don't want you to inflate your importance. I wasn't ever hiding the box or my extracurricular activities. I didn't think it was any of your business, and I govern myself accordingly. But since you found it, understand that my business is mine, and mine alone. It will be beneficial for you to be cognizant of that fact henceforth. Now, to the important stuff. I have been, and always will be, several steps ahead of you. I watched my cameras every day and noticed that you were taking Juanita's belongings out a little at a time. At first, I assumed that you were supplying your whore with a new wardrobe, but I noticed that you weren't ever bringing in anything new. I watched every day, giving you just enough rope to hang yourself, and boy, did you hang yourself. I let you tell me that Juanita just went away, and I pretended to believe you. I watched her come into this house and cook and clean. I laughed at the assertion that you'd actually think I would believe that you were cooking and cleaning that well. A small part of me was entertained by it. I watched you have sex with her in our house, in our bed. I tolerated because my plan mandated that I do so. I will, however, give you a little bit of credit. It was quite clever to have me believe that you had given up that little house in the country. But keeping in line with the fool that you are, you went there every day, never expecting me to figure it out. You led me right to her. So that's why I'm a bit late today, sweetheart. Unfortunately for you, your little situation in the country is no longer. You're set to receive a hefty insurance payout, but as the executor of your estate, trust me when I tell you that you won't see a penny of it. Don't look so surprised, sweetheart. You don't remember signing all of your assets over to me? But I have the paperwork right here. Chapter 17, Phase 1, Flirt with Disaster. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. David started to slip further and further into his drug habit, so much so that he became sloppy. He didn't meddle with the details as much. For the most part, David kept up appearances in public, but it was an entirely different story at home. He was a mess. I don't think David lost the desire to punish me. I think he lost the ability. His alternate life took up too much time and energy. The cracks were definitely showing. David openly did drugs in front of me, and I was able to assess his behavior while he was under the influence of each. Things became a little easier once I knew what to expect. Some drugs made David mellow. Some made him anxious, and some made him violent. Powder days were the worst. If David was snorting powder, it was pretty much a given that I would be physically abused that day. It didn't matter how I behaved or how well I met his demands. He would still find a reason why the battering was justified. Though altered and broken, life was somewhat predictable. The pills made David anxious. the patches made him sleepy, and the powder made him violent. That was my new normal, and I adjusted to the change. The predictability was shaken when an escalation occurred. The P3 box became P4, and all bets were off. The fourth P was what Juanita called polvo, but in the States, we called it heroin. Heroin David was different than any of the other Davids. While the other drugs did one thing or the other, heroin made David horribly unpredictable. Any given day, he'd be euphoric, depressed, laughing, crying, violent, or apologetic, all within the same episode. The only constant was the ending. Regardless of how the heroin episode played out, it always ended with David passing out for hours. While the pass-outs offered some relief from David's unpredictable brutality, they also signaled a progression in his drug use. I found myself facing the same reality from which I had tried to save Juanita. Life wouldn't be getting any better, and I knew it. I had to find a way out, but I had to be smarter than I was with Juanita. I had to outthink David, so I put a plan in motion. It would require a lot of work on my behalf, and it had to work. I wouldn't make it out of that house if it didn't. That was a fact of which I was sure. So, this was the plan. I broke it down into phases. Phase 1. First, I had to find all the cameras in the house. David told me that he watched me while he was at the office. Based on that information, I assumed that he had an app installed on his phone. Knowing David, he would not likely view the cameras while he was at home. He was arrogant enough to assume that he was in control as long as he was there. I waited for a heroin day, knowing that David would pass out. After I was comfortable that he was out cold, I looked through his phone and found the security camera app. I copied his login information and installed the app in a secure folder on my phone. David was truthful when he said that there were cameras in every room of the house. There were multiples in some rooms. I fidgeted with the app and learned its ins and outs. I even learned how to completely disable each camera. In searching through David's phone, I discovered that he also had a tracker on my car and a recorder on my phone. Each had their own separate app. I began to realize that David wasn't intuitive or several steps ahead of me, as he often claimed. He was just tech savvy. David was beating me in the race in the same way that I thought I was beating Sharon. And if I'd learned anything else, I'd learned that knowledge of the conditions was beneficial in any race. That's what David had over me, knowledge. So I had to shift the narrative. But just like in any other good attack, I had to let him think that he was still winning. I retrieved the login information for the tracker and recording apps and did just as I had done with the camera app. I also copied the information for the banking app. I couldn't imagine that unlimited banking access wouldn't come in handy at some point. I duplicated the processes on my tablet, just in case. I studied the features of each of the apps and learned how to disable them. I realized that David probably wasn't ever checking my car mileage. He simply relied on the information from the app to give him the answers. He also relied on my assumption that he was always several steps ahead of me, and I decided to test that theory. I awoke one morning with the intention to flirt with disaster. I had to see if I could circumvent David's operation. I couldn't imagine what he'd do if he caught on to what I was doing, but I decided to take my chances. I completed my morning routine and joined David for the breakfast that I had prepared. I pretended to be interested in his idle chatter and laughed at his dry jokes. I walked David outside and stood on the porch as he prepared to drive to his office. I watched him wave to our neighbors who had no idea that they lived next door to a psychopath. I watched David walk to his car and let himself in. I watched him drive away without ever checking my car's mileage. I went into the kitchen to retrieve the note for that day. David wanted vegetable lasagna with whole wheat noodles. We had several jars of store-bought pasta sauces, but David requested that I make some from scratch. Luckily for me, there were several items that needed to be purchased from the store, and that provided me with an excellent opportunity to do a trial run. I went outside and got into my car. I wrote down the mileage to ensure that I had the plan down to a fine science. I drove to the grocery store and again notated the mileage. I had driven 7.5 miles exactly. I retrieved the items needed from the store and got back into the car. I went into go mode. I took out my cell phone and opened the tracker app. I went in and paused the location. I drove with no clear-cut destination, 5 miles in one way and 5 miles for the return. I rehearsed the cover story in my mind and felt comfortable that I could execute it perfectly. I returned to the grocery store and I turned the location back on. That part was complete. I opened the phone recorder app and returned to the recording to off mode. I made a call that I wanted to make for years, but I was always too nervous to do so. I called Cream, and against all odds, she still had the same phone number. We caught up and I told her that I missed her. We promised to get together at some point in the future. And even though it had been years, Cream told me that she was sorry to hear about Antonio. I heard the sadness in her voice and I knew that she was coming from a genuine place. She ended the conversation in Cream niece. I miss you, little girl. Tain't the same out here no more. Equals, I miss you, little girl. It isn't the same out here anymore. We said our goodbyes as I approached the stop sign near the house that I shared with David. It was time to switch gears. I opened the recorder app and turned the recording function back to on mode. After doing so, I drove the long way around the neighborhood, causing me to go 1 mile outside of my destination. I notated the mileage as I pulled into the driveway. I had driven exactly 26 miles. I went into the house and called Mandy. We reviewed the details of an upcoming function with our usual fake enthusiasm. I sat and jotted down a list of everything that was requested of me. We talked about some of the potential attendees and what they'd likely be wearing. Mandy and I promised to sit at the same table to ensure that we could critique each person as they walked through the door. We chatted for a short amount of time and ended the call. I knew that I had things to do. I followed my normal routine with a twist. I entered our bedroom and went straight into my bathroom. I started cleaning my toilet. While cleaning, I paused the cameras in my bathroom, David's bathroom, and our bedroom. I exited my bathroom and stepped over to clean David's. After doing so, I returned to my bathroom. After positioning myself back at the toilet, I unpaused all the cameras. I finished cleaning my bathroom and then meticulously cleaned the rest of the house. And then I made dinner. David arrived home a little after 7 o'clock. Everything was in place and dinner was complete. David greeted me with a smile. "Hello, sweetheart," he said. I offered a convincing, cheerful smile as well. Although David was smiling, I knew he had a trick up his sleeve. I saw the mischief on his face. David grabbed my arm as I attempted to walk away. He addressed me. "Sweetheart, where did you go today?" I told him that I had only gone to the grocery store. And just as I knew he would, David asked which one. I answered him truthfully, of course. David placed his index finger on his chin. He said. "The grocery store is exactly 7.5 miles away, which means that you should have traveled 15 miles. Why is it that, upon checking your mileage, I realized that you have traveled 16 miles today?" Per my rehearsed story, I explained to David that there were maintenance workers that were repairing a power line on the main road. I told him that I was forced to take a detour, which placed me a little out of the way. David displayed a stiff grin. "Oh, I see," he said. David told me that he was going to take a shower and he expected that his dinner would be on the table when he exited. "Yes, sir," I said. I arranged everything perfectly down to the minutest details. David emerged and I could see the fury in his face. He walked over to me and grabbed me by the hair. I screamed as he carelessly dragged me down the hallway to our bedroom. David pushed me into my bathroom, which was located to the right. He addressed me in a very aggressive manner. "What are you smelling here?" Before I could answer, he pulled me by my hair again. I lost my balance, causing me to hit my eye on the corner of the dresser. He pulled me into his bathroom, which was located to the left. "Why does my bathroom not smell like bleach?" asked David. I sobbed and apologized, even though the bathroom very clearly smelled of bleach. David pushed me away. The right side of my body came into contact with his sink prior to me falling on the floor. He knelt down beside me and began to speak. "It seems as though you were too distracted to clean my bathroom today. Do I need to take your phone away to avoid such instances in the future?" No, sir, I said. David told me that I should call Mandy and ask her to help with the mess since her conversation had been a distraction in my cleaning process. Before I could inquire about the mess of which he was speaking, David unzipped his pants and urinated on me and all surrounding areas of the bathroom. You can clean this up while I eat, he said. He told me that I could take a shower after his bathroom was cleaned to his satisfaction. David exited. I started the process of meticulously cleaning the bathroom, just as I had done earlier. I looked into the mirror. My right eye was nearly swollen shut. I smiled through the blood that had accumulated in my mouth. In my mind, I thought, sweet success. Success. What does that mean? Well, I paused the tracker app and drove 5 miles away from the grocery store and 5 miles for the return. I turned the app back on and drove 1 mile out of the way on the return home. If David had actually checked my mileage, he would have noticed that I traveled 10 extra miles. His assertion that I was only 1 mile over had cued me into the fact that he'd relied on the tracker app only, opposed to his assertion that he checked my car's odometer. Success. I disabled the phone recorder and called Cream. If David had heard my conversation, he would have referenced it in some way. The narcissism in him would not have allowed him to hold that in. David never told me that he had a recorder on my phone, so he wouldn't have referenced it outright. But I had started to understand how his mind worked. David always wanted me to feel that he was several steps ahead of me. If he had heard my conversation with Cream, he would have mentioned the details in a way that made him look observant and intuitive. If David didn't mention it, it was simply because he was unaware that it existed. But he did reference my conversation with Mandy. And since I had access to the camera app, I was aware that the cameras in the house had no sound. David's awareness that I had talked to Mandy could only be explained by the fact that he had actually listened to the recording. He'd obviously heard my conversation with Mandy, which I wanted him to hear. Yet, he did not hear the bait conversation with Cream, which I didn't want him to hear. Success. I paused the cameras while I cleaned David's bathroom. I unpaused it after I was done, given the perception that I hadn't cleaned it at all. It was obvious that David had watched the camera footage. Had I not properly paused the cameras, David would have seen me cleaning his bathroom. The beating that I received had cued me into the fact that I was able to manipulate the cameras in a way that made David think that I was doing one thing while doing something completely different. Success. That was the day that I learned that I could beat David by letting him think that he was winning. I tempted fate on numerous occasions after that day, but I never again paused the footage during my cleaning. I learned that on that day as well. However painful the experience, phase 1 of the plan was complete, and next it was on to phase 2. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.